Hey everybody, welcome to another episode 10 of Pizza Legends. In this video, we're going to add some presentational polish to two of our previous Overworld events. By the end of this video, our text messages will have a nice typewriter effect to them, which makes them feel more conversational, and our Overworld map changes will have a nice fade that kind of smooths out the before and after. These changes are really going to make the game feel more put together, so let's get started. So the first thing we're going to work on today is improving the presentation of these text box messages. So when I talk to this person, the message just appears here and then it immediately goes away when I hit the button again. Instead of it just appearing like this, we want to introduce a typewriter effect where the message appears character by character. So let's pop over to the code, and the first thing I want to do is start the game with a cutscene. Remember, we have this commented out, but I'm going to go ahead and remove most of these except an initial text message there. Change the text a little bit to be something a little bit longer. There we go. Now, just for kicks, I'm going to start the game in a different map. I feel like we've been spending all of our time in the demo room. Let's just change it up. So instead, we're going to init the map in the kitchen instead. Let's see how this looks. Alrighty, so the game boots up. We start with the message on screen. Let's start working on the appearance of this message. Currently, we have one paragraph tag, and it's just very normal paragraph. There's text inside it. What we're going to do is actually slice up the text in this paragraph to have each character be an individual span tag. So by separating the characters into individual span tags, we'll be able to individually turn them visible one by one. So they're all going to start invisible, and then one by one, we're going to go visible, 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 and then it'll look like a typewriter. Now, I've done a whole video on this technique before, and I'll be sure to leave a card to that somewhere in this video right here that goes into a little bit more detail on some of the depth that we can do with this system. We're going to do like a really initial implementation of it, but it's really going to go a long way in this game. So let's go ahead and write the CSS we need to achieve that kind of effect. We're going to go into our textmessage.css file that we created in the previous video, and right under text message P here, we're going to add a few new rules. One is going to be just for any span inside the text message, we're going to start it with opacity 0. And then we're going to take that same concept and any span that has a class called revealed on it will flip to opacity 1. Now, this concept of revealing characters is going to come in handy in a few different cases in the project, not just in our text message component. And so we're going to make a reusable JavaScript utility to kind of help us out here and encapsulate that behavior. So I'm going to make a new JavaScript file called revealingtext.js. And in here is going to be a class. So per usual, we're going to have a constructor that takes in some configuration and then a few properties on this class. The first thing we're going to make is an element, and this element is actually going to be an existing element that we pass in. This is the element that we want to fill with those individual span tags. So next we want to take in the text that we're going to fill into that element. So that'll be config.text, and then the speed in which we want to reveal those individual characters. And this will be configurable, but if we don't provide one, we're going to default to like 70 milliseconds per character. So next we have two little bits of state. First is a timeout, which can start null. We're going to be using a JavaScript set timeout to kind of handle the cadence of when these characters should appear, and we're going to be saving that timeout to a class variable here. And then the next is just a flag that tells us if we're done revealing the message or not, and that starts false. So the behavior we're going for here is that if you hit the enter key while the text is revealing and it's not done revealing all the way yet, then we want to jump to the end of it and reveal it all. So you don't have to like wait for every single character to roll out. That can get really annoying. But if you hit the enter key and the text is already fully revealed, then we're good to end the Overworld event and to proceed on to the next thing. So let's write the code that's going to split the text out into those individual span tags. I'm going to start an init method here and start with an empty array. We'll call it characters. Now I want to split my text into an array of individual characters. And so to do that, we can say this.text split, splitting it an empty character there, and then we're going to iterate through those. So for each character, this will basically take something that looks like A, B, C and turn it into A is one character, B is the next one in the array, and then, C, just like that. So in the loop here, we can create our span tag. So I'll say span is document.create element of type span. Span's text content is going to be character. So that'll just be one letter. And then we're going to add this span to our element that's passed into the constructor. So this.element.append child span. So just to add some clarity here, we're gonna create each span, add to element in DOM. And now we want to add each span here to our internal bit of state so that we can reference each span later and kind of toggle things on and off on it. So I'm going to say, so I'll say characters dot push. We're going to push the span and then also some other detail that goes along with it. So we're going to include our span tag, of course, but then we're also going to include how long we want to wait after this character to reveal the next one. We'll call that delay after. Normally that's just going to be the same as whatever speed is passed into the component here. But there are certain cases where we don't want to honor that speed. We want to just like skip through it and have it happen faster. And so I want to say here, if character is equal to a space character, just like that, then we want to just pass in 0 for this value, but otherwise we want to use this dot speed. Having delays after a space character can kind of make the presentation of the text feel a little bit jankety, and so when there's nothing to show, we're just going to immediately skip to the next thing that we do have to show. Now let's actually get this wired up onto the screen so we can see kind of what it's doing. So I'm going to go into our text message component, where in the previous video we just locked the text into the paragraph directly like this. We're going to go ahead and back that part out. So we're just going to start with an empty paragraph. And now we're going to use our new component type here. So this dot revealing text is going to be a new instance of revealing text. And then we're going to pass in our text that normally we included right in the paragraph there. So that's this dot text. And then we're also going to include the element that we want to fill with those span tags. And so that's going to be our text message P here. So here I'll say the element is going to be this dot element dot query selector text message P is a class there. So even though this bit hasn't actually hit the DOM yet, because it's in the element, we can still query select and find, kind of drill down to the element that we're looking for. I'm going to add a comment here that we're going to init the typewriter effect. And then after we do append everything to the DOM, we can take that and go ahead and kick it off. So we'll say this dot revealing text dot init. And now we need to make sure this is actually getting included on the page. I don't think we've added it yet. So down here, we'll add our new revealing text. And let's load this up and see what it looks like. Okay, so the screen looks empty, but as you can see over here, we do have a text message paragraph and we have our letters coming in as individual spans. They're all invisible right now because of that CSS we wrote towards the beginning there. But if we take one of these and just flip it to opacity 1, you can see that it's revealed there. So that's what our code is going to start doing now. So back in revealing text.js, right after we initialize here, we're going to kick off a method that's going to start a little bit of a loop. And that's going to be this dot reveal one character, and then we're going to pass in our characters list that we created in that loop down there. And so let's go ahead and define this here. This is going to take in a list. And now this method is going to be recursive. So it's going to reveal one character in the list, the first one, and then it's going to wait for whatever the delay after says to wait for, and then it's going to call itself again. And it's going to keep doing that until we have revealed every character in the list. So in this method, the first thing we want to do is grab that first character from the list. So we'll say list. It's going to be the first one, but we also want to just remove that first one from the list too. So I'm going to go ahead and splice it off and then grab the first one. And then in that entry, I can grab the span that's inside it and go ahead and add our class that should reveal it. So we'll say class list.add. We called it revealed in the CSS. Now if our list still has some length left in it, we want to go ahead and keep calling this thing. And so we're going to say this dot timeout is going to be set timeout. This way we'll be able to cancel it later if we need to. We'll get to that in a second. And the duration of the timeout should be what we saved down here. So delay after, so that's going to be on next.delay after. When this timeout is up, we can simply call this same method again. So reveal one character, passing in our newly modified list. So as it runs, it'll work down this list one by one by one by one, and then finally it just will stop. Okay, so that should be list, the new list. And then remember, we're keeping track of this is done flag. And so if the length is over, and we're down to 0 length now, we can add a little update to that flag there. So is done is gonna be true. Now I'm noticing I messed up here. It should be config.speed, not config.element. That's probably a bad copy paste. That would definitely mess things up. But with that in place, let's see if we pop over to the browser just how things are looking. And here you go, our message reveals character by character. And then if we want to play with the speed in which those characters are revealed, we can mess with this number here. So to have a longer time, that's like hilariously slow. I think like 60 or 70 is kind of a good sweet spot. So our enter key is still wired up from the previous video to end the overworld event whenever we hit enter. But now we want to add in the bit where if the text is not done revealing, we want to go ahead and skip to the end of the text message so I can read the whole thing without having to wait for every single character to come. Right now, if I hit enter in the middle, it'll just completely skip past everything and I won't know what was said. So back to our code, I'm going to add a new method here called warp to done. And if this is called, it's going to go ahead and just reveal all of the spans without having to do all this, and then go ahead and set our event to done. So what I'm going to do is clear that timeout that we're setting. So that's going to be this .timeout, so that nothing continues to happen there. We're just going to stop it. And then I'm going to set our flag is done to true. And then finally, I'm going to iterate through all of those spans and make sure that they're all visible. So in our element here, I can say this.element.query selector all. For every span, we're going to iterate through them. And here I can say s.classlist.add revealed to make sure they're all revealed. So for actually calling this method, I'm going to head over to our text message component. And remember, we have this little like is done, this done method that we call. Here, instead of just assuming that we're done, I'm going to go ahead and check our revealing text instance and see if it's done. Otherwise, we're going to say this revealing text should warp to done. And we can go ahead and move this call to our unbinder to the part where we fire on complete. So let's fire this up. So now when I hit enter, when the text is revealing, it warps to the end. So if I hit it now, it'll just jump to the end, and then I can hit enter again to complete the event. If I just let it go all the way like this and then hit enter, it'll just go ahead and end the event. So now when I walk up to people in the game and talk to them, the text messages just feel a little bit better. It's a subtle thing, but it goes a long way. So let's change gears here and start talking about map transitions and maybe how we can smooth those over. So I'm going to get rid of all of our files here, pull up Overworld.js, and in the part that we're starting with a text message here, I'm going to go ahead and comment that out, and instead we're going to start with a map transition. So the type is change map, and the map, since we're starting in the kitchen now, we'll transition back to the demo room. So the value is demo room. Let's load this up now, and you can see that even though the game boots up in the kitchen technically, it immediately switches us to the demo room here, and that's what we see. So it's working, but it just happens so fast that it's kind of jarring. And we can see it again if I switch back to the kitchen by stepping on this doorway space. Again, the new map just kind of appears. What we want to add is a nice little transition. So the way this is going to work is actually pretty simple. Instead of just firing off the change map command like we're doing now, we're going to introduce an overworld fade, or a scene transition fader. So we're going to start fading the screen to white by adding an overlay. It's going to start invisible and then transition its way to be fully opaque. While it's opaque and covering the screen, we're going to fire off our change map command, and then we're going to reverse the fade. So it's going to fade from opaque, being back to invisible, and that will reveal the new map. The whole thing's going to feel a little less jarring. Okay, so back to code. We need two new files. One's going to be a style sheet, and it's going to be called scene transition.css. That's created, and then we need the equivalent JavaScript file created. So we'll go here and say scene transition.js. Let's get both of these included on the page here. So in index, we're going to have a new style sheet up top for scene transition. And then we're also going to have a new JavaScript component on bottom. Same name, scene transition. Let's tackle the CSS first. So I'm just going to make a new style for a rule for a component called scene transition. And I'm going to paste in some styles here, just some basic stuff. It's going to hug the corners of the screen and stretch itself out that way. So position absolute, and then we got all 4 corners, left, top, right, and bottom, all is 0. The color is going to be white, and you can make that whatever you want. I think white looks kind of nice. And then it's going to start with opacity 0. And this is what we're going to change and animate up to 1. For that animation to happen, I'm going to make a new keyframe animation here. So it's going to be keyframes. And we're going to call it scene transition fade in. And so this one is going to start from opacity 0, and it's going to go to opacity 1. Clean that up. And then let's do the same thing for the opposite. So scene transition fade out is going to start at 1 and come down to 0. Now we need to apply the animation to our scene transition element here. And so what I'm going to say is animation, and then our scene transition fade and name. We're going to give it a time. For this video, I'm going to use 1.2 seconds. In reality, that's way too long, probably. It won't feel that good in game, but showing it on camera is a little bit jarring, and so I'm just going to space it out. Really, in the game, I think I use like 0.3 or so in the demo code I made. You can, again, tweak that to be whatever you want. And now say this element has a fade out class. Then we want to change the animation to be our fade out animation. I think that's all we need CSS-wise, so pretty straightforward. Let's move on to the JavaScript side, where we're going to make a new class called scene transition. It's going to have a constructor, and the constructor is going to be pretty boring. It's just going to start a new element, but have it be null. And this is really just to follow some patterns that we've done so far. We're also going to have that create element method, and that's what's going to actually create the element. Who would have thunk, right, by the name. So it's going to be document.createElement, and this is just going to be a div. This is the element that's going to receive the styles we just wrote. So we can say classlist.add, and again, it's going to be scene transition, lining up with the component name. Next, I'll add our good old init method, which is really just going to run that create element method. And then, like we do sometimes with init, we're going to provide a container, and then container will append child our element. Now scene transition is going to immediately start animating in, remember, because it starts with opacity 0 and it's got the right animation to it. So as soon as it hits the DOM, it's going to start animating in. And so what we want to do is also provide a callback that should happen when that animation is done. To know that it's done, we can add an event listener to the element, add event listener for on animation end. And when this fires, we know that that CSS animation is completed. We only want this to happen once though, and so this add event listener allows you to pass a second object with a thing called once, and that way this binding will immediately unbind when it's done. So we're gonna let this thing fade in, and then we're gonna call our callback. But again, this thing, we're eventually gonna have it fade out. We don't want this to fire again if a different animation finishes on the same element, so that's why we do the once. And so let's add a way for that fade out to happen. We'll add a new element called fade out. And it's going to take our element and add a class to it. And we call that in the CSS fade-out. And that's what's going to trigger that animation to start going backwards, going from fully opaque to opacity 0. And now whenever it's done fading out, we want to be ready with a different animation listener, event listener for the animation end. But this time, instead of calling some kind of callback, we're just going to remove this element from the scene. Okay, so let's head over to our Overworld event and actually try to use this thing. So in our change map event, remember we're just kind of immediately firing off the map change. What we want to do is wait and fire it off during that middle section of the Overworld fade. So I'm going to say const scene transition is going to be a new instance of scene transition. Then we're going to go ahead and init it, giving it a selector. We can use the same selector that we used in our text message event above. We'll be using this a lot. We'll probably refactor how it's called in a minute, but for now, we'll just call it like this. And then we're going to give it that callback that should happen after the animation is done coming in. Okay, so poking back here, I don't know how I messed this up, but it should be animation end, not on animation end. I always get those mixed up. But coming back to Overworld event, let's just check and make sure this is all working. So I'm going to comment out the part that actually changes the map and then just add a little signal. So this should happen when the overworld fade has come in all the way. So coming over to the browser, when I reload, you can see that the fade in happens, and then I get this nice I am done message. So that tells us that that callback is wired up and working okay. Now we can bring back in our code that actually does the map change. So we'll clean this up, get rid of that console log. And then as soon as that happens, we can resolve the overworld event like we've been doing. But then we want the scene transition to get out of here. So scene transition dot fade out. And when it starts to fade out, we should see the new map that came in. So let's fire this up. Reloading, out with the kitchen, in with the demo map. And we can see that again. If I just walk south, we should see demo map fade out and then the kitchen fade in. And there we go. The whole thing feels much nicer. Now for leaving this video, I'm going to go ahead and take the overworld initial cutscene that happens on game boot and just get rid of it. So we'll comment it out. And now when I load the game, I can walk around the kitchen as normal without anything firing off. So with both the effects that we added in this video, the typewriter text message stuff, and then this overworld fade, I want you to not be afraid to go in and tweak things, make them your own. I've given us some starting points here with what the things look and feel like, but definitely make this your own, get in there, play with the values. It's your game. Thank you so much for watching this video to the end. As always, I really appreciate it when you hit the like button and subscribe for more. We're about to get into the battle section of this series, which I'm really excited about, so stay tuned for that. And if you haven't already, you should definitely join our indie game developer Discord. The link's below. We'd love to see you there. Thank you so much. Catch you in the next episode.